Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, we're going to be going over some higher profile defensemen that I don't know if they're going to be available or not, but let's have a conversation about them. One of the guys that we're going to be talking about here in the video is Colton Parayko, and look, I know it's Dean Blundell, but people were having the conversation, so we're going to have our own conversation surrounding this. And the second guy that we're going to be talking about in today's video is Aaron Ekblad. Now, this is from an Athletic article with Jonas Siegel and James Myrtle talking about what the Maple Leafs should do next after the Kasperi-Kapanen trade. So taking a look at this little armchair GM that I whipped up really quickly, there are a couple of contract projections here, so don't mind that, but the Maple Leafs could conceivably have just over $4 million of cap space left to improve upon this roster if we were to assume that Andreas Johnsson gets dealt away, and maybe Andreas Johnsson is included in one of these trades. And if you were going to add a defenseman of the magnitude of a Colton Parayko or an Aaron Ekblad, obviously priorities would change. You would make that move before giving money to guys like Evan Rodriguez or Ilya Mikheyev or Travis Dermott, and you're also allowed to exceed the salary cap or the upper limit of it by 10% in the offseason. They don't have to worry about being cap compliant till later on. All right, so moving on over to evolvinghockey.com, Evolving Wild on Twitter here to look at some advanced metrics. And when we're looking at players like Colton Parayko and Aaron Ekblad, I want to take a look at a couple seasons. What have they done for me recently, and what have they done for me in the past? So we know both these guys are absolute monsters. We know that they shoot right-handed, and they would both automatically become the best right-handed shooting defensemen that the Toronto Maple Leafs have had in years. But when we're looking at their two most recent seasons, we're seeing a little bit of a dip in production here, but I don't think that affects their acquisition cost much. I think that Aaron Ekblad would command a little bit more in a trade due to his contract and his age. He's a little bit younger than Colton Parayko, and also he comes with that former first overall pick pedigree. And when we're taking a look at their advanced stats on HB Analytics here, when we're looking at the percentile and how they stack up against other players in the league, yeah, they're both just awesome defensemen, and I would love to have them on this team, either of them. And when we're taking a look at their zone starts here on Hockey Reference, both players kind of used in similar roles over the course of their careers. This is Aaron Ekblad. And when we're taking a look at Colton Parayko, same sort of thing. Both used in more defensive roles than they are offensive roles, and that's to be understandable. Both are kick-ass at both ends of the ice, really. So let's take a look at why these players might be available here. And when we're talking about the St. Louis Blues, it's evident, it's obvious, they want to re-sign Alex Pietrangelo. But as we're moving closer and closer towards the offseason, it's becoming more apparent that more and more teams might be operating under internal salary caps that are below the upper limit of $81.5 million next season. We don't know if the St. Louis Blues are one of those teams, but they only have $2 million in cap space free for next season anyway, and Alex Pietrangelo more than likely commands $8 to $9 million on his next deal. If you're looking at their roster here, I mean, maybe they try to look to move on from an Alexander Steen making $5.75 million. Maybe they look to move on from a Tyler Bozak. I mean, they just gave big money to Justin Falk. They just gave big money to Marco Scandella. And if you're looking at their goaltending situation, Binnington just led them to a cup and was terrible this season, and Jake Allen was better all along. So I don't know how you make a decision between those two. The majority of the teams around the league are going to be working under an internal salary cap, so they're not going to be lining up to help you with their cap problems. And you could turn around and say to me, well, they're not going to be lining up to help the Leafs either. And I would say, no, they're not going to be lining up to help them, but the assets or the players that the Maple Leafs are trying to move out are not 36 years old making $5.75 million, or they're not 34 years old making $5 million either. I mean, hell, even if they could afford to buy out both Steen and Bozak, that's only an extra $5.1 million in cap space. That's still not enough to re-sign Alex Pietrangelo. And it's not just Pietrangelo here. They need to re-sign RFA Vince Dunn, who was a huge part of their team this past season and when they won the Stanley Cup. And when we're talking about Aaron Ekblad and the Florida Panthers here, I mean, they were already mandated to cut $10 million in salary, which is exactly what Sergei Bobrovsky makes on his deal per season before the shutdown, before the economic crash. And unfortunately, if we're talking about acquiring a guy like Aaron Ekblad, who is going to be 25 this February, it's probably going to cost you William Nylander. But I think I called Florida to have a conversation about Aaron Ekblad, and then maybe I talk to them about Mackenzie Weegar because I think he's a very interesting player, but that's not what this video is about. Now, initially in that rumor from Dean Blundell, the Toronto Maple Leafs were offering up Andreas Johnsson, the 15th overall pick from the Pittsburgh Penguins, and Timothy Liljegren for 2 years of Colton Parayko. I think if you're including Andreas Johnsson, the 15th overall pick, and Liljegren in a deal for Parayko, I don't think you understand what Timothy Liljegren is worth in a trade. This is pick224.com, and I will leave it in the description of this video if you want to mess around with it. It is a great prospect comparison tool here. But what we're looking at on the screen right now is defenders playing in the American Hockey League sorted by even strength primary points per games played. So these are the best, most play-driving offensive defensemen in the entire American Hockey League here. And here's Erik Brannstrom, which was the main piece in the Mark Stone trade that included an 8-year extension. And here's Timothy Liljegren, just a couple of players below him. They're both the same age. They were both drafted the same year. Just because some people are writing lazy articles that you gotta pay for about the guy doesn't mean that he's a bad player. Andreas Johnsson, the 15th overall pick, and Timothy Liljegren is way too much for a guy who did not have the greatest of playoffs, by the way, and is coming off of a worse season than his previous one. Say it the way that it is, because if you don't, people are going to take advantage of you. And this doesn't scare me away from wanting to acquire Colton Parayko. All it does is temper or adjust what I'm willing to give up for this player right now. And if the St. Louis Blues don't want to understand that or adjust their asking price, or maybe the guy's not even available to begin with, then that's fine. You hang up the phone and you explore other options because there are several. I am comfortable giving up Timothy Liljegren in a deal for Colton Parayko. I'm just not comfortable giving up all three of those things. And while teams in the NHL usually line up to help other teams get out of cap trouble, I don't think it's going to be the same because the GMs just aren't going to have the actual physical dollars, with half the league probably operating under an internal salary cap. So I don't think that there's going to be a market for a guy like an Alexander Steen or a Tyler Bozak, even if the St. Louis Blues were to sweeten that pot with, let's say, their first round pick this year. And the only way I can see a Parayko trade making sense is if a team did take a Tyler Bozak or an Alexander Steen in that deal, because that would free up over $10.5 million in cap space to go with the already $2 million that they have to work with. That would give them $12 million and more than enough money to re-sign Alex Pietrangelo and Vince Dunn. That would solve their cap issues. And I think that Leaf fans can agree, and I think that Kyle Dubas has learned from the original Phil Kessel trade, is that you do not want dead money on your books like that. You can trade bad players making a sizable amount of money. I mean, the Zaitsev trade is an example of that, but that's just stuck there. So I don't necessarily think that the Toronto Maple Leafs would have any interest in taking on a contract like a Tyler Bozak or an Alexander Steen for the purposes of buying them out. If we could take anything away from the Nazem Kadri for Tyson Barrie and Alexander Kerfoot trade, is that Kyle Dubas probably prefers to look for an option this offseason where he can get salary retention from another team on a player coming over to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Definitely not taking on a bad contract and buying them out. If you're taking a look at what it would cost to buy out a Tyler Bozak, it would be a $2.1 million hit in the first season and a $1.4 million hit in the second season. And that would basically extend the remainder of Colton Parayko's contract. And in that second year there, the Maple Leafs are going to have to re-sign Zach Hyman, and I don't think that they're interested in having $1.4 million of dead money just sitting on their books, not even being able to trade that or move on from it, in addition to the $1.2 million that's just dead money sitting on their books that belongs to Phil Kessel. I mean, you could just pretend that Colton Parayko makes $2.16 million more next season and he costs $7.6 million instead of $5.5 million. But at that price point, you're giving up the 15th overall pick already. I think you'd be better off just clearing out a little bit more space and taking a run at Alex Pietrangelo. So if you're looking at a Colton Parayko trade without taking back a bad contract, what's it realistically going to cost? I'm okay with giving up the 15th overall pick or Timothy Liljegren, not both in the same deal. But on top of the 15th overall pick or a guy like Liljegren, what do you add on top of that? I mean, the Maple Leafs have the 43rd or the 44th overall pick. I would suggest maybe a guy like a Justin Holl or an Andreas Johnsson, but that kind of defeats the point of the trade because I don't think that they would be interested in taking back any contracts or any guys making any money. Do you do the 15th overall pick and the 43rd or the 44th overall pick for Colton Parayko? Do you have to add another prospect on top of that, like a guy like Mac Hollowell or Joseph Duszak? I don't know. All I know is that I'm not comfortable giving up Timothy Liljegren and the 15th overall pick in a deal for a guy that the Maple Leafs probably won't be able to afford to re-sign 2 years from now. And if that's the case, Colton Parayko is not an option for this team, and you just move on to the next one. Because like I keep preaching in these videos, there's not just one solution to fixing the mess that we're in right now. There are several, and you shouldn't force something or lose a trade in order to fix it. And the reason why I went more in depth on Colton Parayko than I did Aaron Ekblad is because trading for Aaron Ekblad would involve moving William Nylander and maybe a little bit more. I don't know. You'd have to take a look at the real money involved in that deal because the real money does play a factor in it. But the whole point of this is that we should try every single option. We should try every single solution before we get to moving one of those guys, because I want to win with the guys that we were told that we were going to win with. I am in that mental headspace still, and I am not moving out of it until I absolutely have to, which is probably at the end of next season if we're being realistic. So make sure to like the video if you did like it and subscribe for more, because more is always on the way. And guys, remember, like I keep preaching, like I said previously, there's not just one solution to fixing the problem here in Toronto. They're going to go through a lot of different options, and if Aaron Ekblad and Colton Parayko don't work out to be one of those options, well, if you're looking at an alphabetized plan of A to Z, there's 26 letters in the alphabet, 2 down, 24 more to go.